All right. All right, let's get started. So today, as I mentioned last time, I'm going to go off the rails a little bit today. I'll still talk about API versus HTML. I don't have any slides for it, but I'll still cover it just for anyone who was interested in what I was going to say, but I'll keep it abbreviated. What I want to do today is more of one of the live, I guess I do this at what am I trying to say? The last Friday of every chunk of homework content, I usually like to do that open-ended kind of examples and everything, helping you with the current content. So I want to do that with a focus on how to deploy your apps, especially if you have questions. Come to me with your questions. Or if everybody who's here already deployed, you could let me know that too, and we could talk about whatever else. But that's my intent today. So if you've all deployed already and everything's working and you have a domain name and all that, then we can do whatever. But that's my intent. Could we go over forwarding headers on Nginx? I'll touch on that, but so maybe a little bit. And I want to talk about the review lecture vote. So the rest of the semester is this one review lecture. So we have one lecture that's up for vote. And then project presentations coming up. Make sure you study the requirements. It's not too complicated. It's like a one-page requirement doc. Just demo your app, and then we use your app. And if everything works, you get your points. I already talked about that. I don't want to reiterate it. Unless there are questions, I'll answer them. But the review lecture vote. Oh, and we could talk about, I never talked about browser extensions this semester. It's one of my favorite lectures, and maybe if there are questions about that, if somebody wants to see that. But I'll prioritize deployment unless y'all go in chat or yell at me and say, we're already deployed, do something better. But a browser extension. So I got my browser extension, so I'm not doxing anybody when I go into Piazza. It just removes all of the identifying information, so I can actually go to Piazza during lecture, which I kind of need to do if I want to show you this post. So this is what the voting is currently happening. There hasn't been much voting at all. So if you don't like what's in the lead right now, because by default that's what Monday's lecture is going to be, but I'll keep checking this up until Monday. I need some time to prep and everything, but whatever's in the lead on Monday, that's what we'll end up doing. So if you don't like what's in the lead, you can always vote. You can vote. And I believe what's in the lead is the Gmail API. Piazza, you're killing me, Piazza. Because I'm doing the same thing in 116 and in both lectures. Piazza's like, hold on. Oh, okay, now you can use the app. Yeah, the Gmail API, I mean, fine, I guess, but I don't want to do like a step-by-step tutorial on this one. The Gmail API is meant to be a documentation reading objective. It's one where you go out there on the internet with very little guidance. I told you like basically how OAuth works, and then talked about how email works. Like I had 2 lectures on this stuff covering the concepts of it, and then you're expected to go to the documentation, find that documentation, which in itself is pretty hard with Gmail because they change their flow like 3 separate times. It's a pain in the butt. But they only support OAuth 2.0 right now. If you're in documentation that says, click this box to allow unsafe apps, and then you're done. You're in the wrong documentation. It doesn't work like that anymore. So you need to use OAuth 2.0 for the Gmail API. If it's talking about OAuth 2.0, you're probably in the right spot. But that's what that objective is all about. So doing a one-to-one walkthrough, I'm not going to do, but I'll do, if this stays in the lead, I'll do something with it. I don't know, maybe I'll use the API and show you like after you get your access token, how to use it. Maybe I'll send everybody in the class an email or something. I don't know. I don't know what I'll do. I really don't know what to do with this one without doing a step-by-step walkthrough, which I don't want to do. I don't want to just give away. I don't mind giving away some objectives, like deployment. I've given away already, and I'm going to give away in more detail today. I'm fine with some of them. But the Gmail API one specifically is a documentation reading objective, and it's only 2 AOs, and they're 2 of the last 4 AOs in the entire course. Those really are more than any other objective in the entire course. Those are your earn your A points. So I don't want to just say, here's how you earn your A. That's where you really got to earn your A, at least as a team. So I'm hesitant to do. I already said it, but that's what's in the lead right now. I can discount 1 vote because the TA voted, but still, C++ lecture. Well, I really don't want to do that. I mean, I'd rather do that than the Gmail API. Game making and 3D games on the web. I mean, that'd be a lot of prep work for me, but that'd be fun. And then this one, I like this one, but we'll see. We'll see what the votes happen. This one I actually did a few semesters ago. This was voted on, and we did that. It actually ended up being kind of boring, to be honest. Like, it's actually really easy to do. I did it in half the lecture, and then I just played Minecraft the other half of the lecture. In WebSockets and WebSocket stuff is fine. But yeah, so that's what the voting's turning out to be. That's what we're looking at for that week. So if you don't like that, get your suggestions in, get your votes in, and we'll see how it ends up on by Monday. Should we do a vote? Oh, and I didn't wrap up the rest of that thought. The reason I want to make sure everybody knows deployment is twofold. One, deployment should probably be a learning objective. I want everybody in this course to know how to deploy. It's really important that you know how to deploy your app because that's the whole point. I feel like I just said this on Wednesday, but that's like the whole point of building a web app is to deploy it. Like, if you're not deploying your web app, what the hell are you building it for? If you're building a web app to just run on localhost, you could have built a desktop app. You could have just built a regular GUI and built it that way. You're building a web app to be used over the internet. Like, that's the point. So if you don't know how to deploy your app and get it out there to actual people, what are we even doing here? So it's something I want everybody to do. Logistically, it's tough to do. I'd like to have it like homework 4 is deployment, but logistically, that's really difficult. So I made it a project thing, so at least every team gets that experience. And it's also worth a lot of application objectives, again, to stress how important it is. It's your entire presentation and 2 AOs on project part 4. So it's 8 AOs total relying on your deployment. And you can't do objectives 2 or 3 on project part 4 without deploying. You have to deploy to get any points on project part 4. So you could argue that there's 12 AOs hinging on deployment. So I want to make sure I cover this step by step in detail, walk you through it, unlike the Gmail API. I don't want to do the same thing with the Gmail API. All right, so let's just go through deployment again. And specifically questions. I want to know, because I've been getting questions in office hours, like whatever the specific questions are at the moment. What's giving people trouble is what I want to hear. Otherwise, I'll just go on Rails and kind of just go through it all. So last time you know what, let's start right from the top. So when you get your DigitalOcean, I hear some people are having trouble with the GitHub developer pack. From what I've heard, all of it's been resolved. If anybody is still having trouble, make sure you're using your buffalo.edu email address for both GitHub and DigitalOcean. If you're not using your buffalo.edu, because that's how they decide you're a student, is your buffalo.edu email address. Any email address that ends with .edu. That's how they decide you're a student. So if you're not using that, if you're using your Gmail account, like, they're not going to give you free shit. Like, they're giving you free stuff because you're a college student. You're paying, I guess you can look at it as you're paying tuition to get access to that. Bless you. So make sure you're using your buffalo.edu email address, and then go to the developer pack site, and it should immediately redirect you to applying and going through the whole process. And then DigitalOcean, also use your buffalo.edu, so it knows to link those two accounts. If one of them you're using your Gmail, it's not going to know that you're the same person. Like, how would it? How would it know? Y'all know quite a bit about how the internet works at this point. Think through, like, if you're building GitHub and DigitalOcean and you need to verify that somebody's a student, at least with reasonable, to a reasonable degree, without having a whole process of manual reviews and everything, how are you going to set that up? And that's okay. Verified email address here, verified email address here, .edu, same email address. Let's talk. Let's do this. Let's get this done. So I think that's what most of the issues were when students were having issues. But once you get to your DigitalOcean with your $200 in free credit, creating a droplet, choose your region if you care what region you want. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but ideally New York, but New York didn't have the thing that I had wanted when I did that in the last lecture. Basic, regular, you only need the smallest stuff, and then click this arrow, get down to the $4 a month is the cheapest one, just to guarantee that you're not going to go over that $200 a month unless you forget for years to turn this thing off and delete your droplet. You're not going to hit your $200. Spending $4 a month, and for the course, as it turns out, you only need to deploy for a few weeks. $4 out of your $200. You're still going to have $196 left to do whatever, to remember to turn it off before you start getting charged $4 a month. And then there's a bunch of other options. You don't need any of the fancy stuff. These do get expensive, by the way. If you want, say, a dedicated general purpose CPU, like, these get expensive. Ooh, let's go premium too, with 2 SSDs. You can spend a lot of money on cloud computing. It gets expensive, but the entry level, just I want to have a droplet to test some things on, $4 a month. Once you have your droplet, I'm not going to create a third droplet here. I should just get rid of this other one, to be honest. I only use this one for most of my stuff. Once you have your droplet, you're going to have an IP address. You will get a fixed IP for that droplet, which is really important for your DNS setup. Which, do I dare try doing DNS live? I used to do DNS live all the time, but I don't use the, I'm blanking on what the free one is anymore. Is it? Oh, never mind. Yeah.
So, when you were doing DNS stuff, I noticed there were like extra DNS records on on DigitalOcean itself. It was like n1-digitalocean.com or something, or something like that. Like, there was like something you could do with domains on DigitalOcean. There were already a few entries there. What does that do?
That's a good question. I'm not going to have a solid answer for you, but I will tell you the parts that I do know. So you're talking about when you go to the DNS. Ooh, I don't even remember how to get there on DigitalOcean. Maybe networking. I was just at access, right? Oh, that's accessing the droplet.
I usually go create updated DNS records. Usually, domains.
Okay. Oh, I do have domains on. CSE 116 is not managed by this, but I still have it listed. And Cowpuncher, I have managed through. Yeah, and then you're talking about these ones. These are pointing to, and take this with a grain of salt. I haven't done this part of DNS in a while. But these are DigitalOcean's DNS servers. So you're telling these servers, hey, this is my my domain name. So you want to leave these ones here. This is the name server. So you're telling these name servers, hey, start propagating this through the DNS network and tell everybody about my new DNS record here. I believe that's what this is doing. When I use Google domains, which sold to Squarespace, don't get me started, it's frustrating. But when I use Google domains, they don't show any of this. I think they just say, you know what, we'll use our name servers. Like, you don't have to be concerned about that. And then I just tell it my DNS records, and it doesn't even show me this information. So that's why I kind of forgot about this stuff, about the details of how it works. Don't edit anything here. You wouldn't touch anything there. So you will get a similar screen. This is good. I'll still hang out here for the demonstration. You'll get a similar screen no matter what you're using for your name, your domain name. Your DNS setup is going to look something like this, something similar to this. And what you want to do is create an A record with nothing for the host name. Sometimes they make you put an @ symbol. This one is going to make me put an @ symbol. DigitalOcean is going to let me choose, one of my droplets. You would type in your IP address here if you're not using DigitalOcean, which I don't think DigitalOcean is going to give you a free domain name, so I wouldn't recommend DigitalOcean. And then once you choose one, create record, and that should be it. I mean, sometimes issues happen and there's debugging to happen, but that's all you need to do. Yeah, question? What are the other options for? Okay. I'm not even going to remember them all. The only two I've used was A and C name. I don't remember the difference between C name and A. And they have the same configuration. Does anybody know? Anybody want to help me out there? I've been using hostname at, so if you do type something here, I will tell you how the usual setup is you'd have something like this. So again, grain of salt, because my memory's fuzzy. I've just been using A records for so long, and I just redirect everything to my IP address, and then I handle it from there. And I don't bother with fancy DNS setup. I just handle everything on my server. But I believe CNAME is when you want to have subdomains. Like sometimes you'll see documentation. Oh yeah, and it's confirming right here. Sometimes you want Sometimes you'll be going through documentation that says this is how you set up DNS records, and it will say make sure you add a CNAME of www to your DNS records, and that's going to say this subdomain should also refer to my IP address. That should also go to my server. And back in the day, every website had to start with www dot and then your domain name. That's a subdomain. You can have as many subdomains as you want on your server with your domain name. So if you ever see anything, something dot and then something.com, that first part is the subdomain which you have full control over. As many subdomains as you want. If you ever see a website, a URL, or an email address from Microsoft.com.shadydomain.com. They just added a subdomain of Microsoft.com to make themselves look legit. So some people will use this to their benefit to try to scam people. So always look for the actual domain whenever you're trying to verify a URL. But CNAME, I believe, is just used for, the reason I'm hesitating so much on that is you can add like www right here and do the same thing with an A record. That's why I'm kind of hesitant on what the difference between an A and a CNAME is, because you can do the same thing. You do subdomains with both of them, and I don't remember exactly why you would use CNAME over an A record. So that's why what I'm fuzzy on. But that's more DNS setup is if you want to set up subdomains. Or you can do star. I think, can I do wildcards here? Yeah, you can do a wildcard subdomain and just redirect every subdomain to your IP address. Yeah.
It looks like the A record maps the host name, so one of our IP addresses, so a CNAME record maps the host name to another host name.
Host name to another host name. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So if I want So if somebody types in www and I say, I don't have a www subdomain, just send them to my regular host name. That's how I'm interpreting that. Instead of having two separate subdomains that host two different sites, you'd say www is the same thing as my site. So that's probably why the documentation always says that, because that's usually what we want. If I type cc312.com or www312.com, I want the same thing. That makes sense. I can learn things too. So since that's how it works, what I do see a lot, which I've done before, is this. If you type this as your A record and then choose your IP address, this is your actual domain name. You created a subdomain that's cc312.com in addition to your actual domain name, cc312.com. So then you would type in your domain name twice, and it looks silly and everything, but that's the way that this will set up your A record if you type in a domain name. You want to type nothing, or if you're using a service that makes you type the @ symbol, type the @ symbol and get just your domain name. Another common mistake with DNS. DNS can take a while to propagate. These days, it propagates pretty quick, and what propagate means is when I tell DigitalOcean, hey, this is my DNS record, DigitalOcean has that record, and it's going to send that to its servers. It's going to say, hey, this is the new DNS record for cc312.com. And I'm not going to actually create this record because I don't want to break everything, because I have this going through Squarespace domains, which I don't know. I got to change that because Google sold all their domain DNS stuff to Squarespace, and I don't think I want to be a Squarespace customer. I've used just using their interface, like going there for the first time. I don't want to, I shouldn't be advertising for or against any companies, but Squarespace is great. Pay me. They need to sponsor me before I'll say something good. But their interface isn't as intuitive as Google's was. So I don't know. Maybe I just got to get used to it. But it takes a while to propagate sometimes. So DigitalOcean will tell their DNS servers, and those DNS servers will tell other DNS servers, and it'll slowly spread throughout the DNS network. And that can take a little bit. So if you go to your browser and type in your domain name immediately after setting up your DNS record, it might not work right away. You might have to sit there for a bit and let it propagate through the network, because your browser probably isn't going directly to DigitalOcean's DNS servers. It's probably going to some other DNS server, either your ISP's DNS. If you've never did any DNS configuration at all, your browser's probably going to your ISP. That'll be your default DNS server that you go to. And if you're at home and you're going to like Verizon's DNS server, Verizon might not have got the word from DigitalOcean quite yet. So it might not have propagated through the whole network yet. And it might just take a second. So a common mistake with DNS, you create record, you open up a tab, cc312.com, oh, it didn't load. Then you go back here and you change everything. And really it just needed a second to propagate through the network. So don't panic when it comes to DNS. Give it some time, set up your DNS record, see if it loads. If it doesn't load, go make a cup of coffee or something, just chill for a minute, and then go. If it's been, I don't know, usually about 5 minutes, I'll start panicking, at least a little bit, because something might have went wrong. But if you do just A and then your IP address, that should be all you need. I was helping someone in office hours, and the service they were using for DNS was redirecting to www. So in that case, I probably would follow what the documentation says, add the www here as a subdomain, as a separate record. Given what I just learned, as a CNAME makes more sense than an A, because you want that redirecting to your main site, instead of having two different domains and getting people sent to two different places. But you would point to your same, let me try to think this through. They would both point to your same IP address, but the host would be different. So if anywhere in your code you're reading the host name, that's going to be a different value whether somebody has www or not. And with a C name, you're never going to actually see that www. That's my current understanding of what the difference is between them. So when we do like our WebSocket connection and we get window.host, that might have the www, and then that could mess up something on the back end if you're not expecting the W's. So that's what I'm seeing is the difference here. Okay. I didn't expect to spend that long on DNS, but I think this is one of the trickier parts. I think this is where I've heard the most questions from getting things set up. All right. Did anyone else get invalid header error while trying to Docker Compose in the droplet? Oh, actually, I did get a question I want to talk about. Didn't configure Nginx yet. I don't know. That's I can't quite wrap my head around invalid header. You installed something that's not Docker. I mean, why not install Docker? Or is Edge the version name of Docker? Yeah, I can't wrap my head around what that is. All right, so when you get your DigitalOcean droplet, you're going to SSH into that droplet, and you're going to get a nice command line. You should have flashbacks to your 220 days. You're going to get a command line and full control over this machine, preferably an Ubuntu instance. I mean, if you're familiar with different distros, I don't care what you use. But I always use Ubuntu distros for my droplets, for what it's worth. And what I recommend is a few things. My process that I would go through. Get into my droplet, clone my repo, install Docker, not necessarily in this order, but install Docker, clone my repo, and run my code in Docker. So when I get here, I'm going to have my code running in Docker. Right here's 312, CSE312.com. I'm running it. I'm mapping local port 8312 to internal port 5000 here because I need different local ports for each one of my apps that's running. And this is a big reason to run Nginx the way I'm about to show is I can have multiple apps running in a single DigitalOcean droplet. So I have my CC312 app, CC312.com, the app running on local port 8312. And then what I want to do is install Nginx on the droplet itself. So this is the key difference that I don't think I was able to tease apart very well that Friday that I did the homework stuff and the project stuff in the same day. I mentioned this briefly last time, but here I can do it more justice, is for the homework, we ran Nginx inside a Docker container because that's kind of the only option we had. Like all of your code has to be in your submission, and we need to be able to grade all of your code. So if you install Nginx on your machine, how are we going to verify that setup? We had to do it in Docker for that reason. It's the way that it worked, the way that it made sense. And you can still do that if you have like a droplet or any instance, any device where you're running a single app. You could run Nginx inside a droplet or inside a Docker container and have all your Nginx configuration as part of your project. That's a valid option to do. I think it does make things a little more difficult, especially when you start getting into certbot, because then you have to get certbot installed inside the container and have certbot able to access inside the container, which can get tricky. I don't even know how I would do that, to be honest. So without a bunch of extra steps, without setting up Nginx outside the container also and having two instances of Nginx, which, it would work. Anyway, what I recommend is installing Nginx right on your device itself, or right on your, there's too many words, too many terms right now, right on your droplet itself, which is the current device, right on your droplet. So I have Nginx installed on the droplet, if you remember from the homework where you put your Nginx configuration, it was in this etc Nginx. When you install Nginx, you'll get that same directory installed on your droplet. And you can take a look at all the configuration for Nginx. We have the top level configuration, Nginx conf, which most importantly says look in the confd directory for any conf files and the sites enabled directory for any files at all, and add those all as additional configuration files. For our homework, we put one configuration file in confd, and we named it default.conf, and that's where all of your Nginx configuration was. And you can still do that if you want to put your configuration file right there. You're only running one site, so there's no need to use the sites enabled. I'm running more than one site, so I'm using the sites enabled directory with a separate configuration file for each one of my sites that I'm running. So if we go into sites enabled, I can see all my configuration for each site that I'm running, and they're all pretty much the same. But we'll pick on 312.com here. And this is going to look very similar to what we had in the homework, but I wouldn't write all of this code. Install Nginx and write just this and this. Sure. And just set up the server to listen on port 80 only, without used to be SSL, but TLS. Set up server, your location, which I'll circle back to that in a second. That was one of the questions in chat. Server name, which is your domain name, which is very important because that's how CertBot is going to find you, is through that domain name. And it was kind of worded wrong. It's how CertBot is going to know what domain you want to add a cert for. You're never going to tell CertBot, hey, I have cc312.com. You're going to say, CertBot, do your thing. And it's going to read your Nginx configuration, look at your server name, and say, oh, would you like a cert for that domain name? And you'll say, yes, please. And listen on port 80. So this line, the server name line, and the location line, all in a single server block. That's what you'll add, which happens to be of course, all the lines that aren't added by CertBot or managed by CertBot. And then when you go install CertBot, certbot-nginx, it's going to go through all this configuration, edit your file, do the redirect, if you tell it to do the redirect, which you should, and add all the SSL certs, which are going to be TLS certs. But again, they changed the name, but didn't change the name with like all the Nginx internal variables. They'll still be SSL, even though the library changed, the protocol changed to TLS. So you'll see SSL all over the place, even though it's all TLS these days. Oh, yeah, and I got to circle back to location. So in location / and then a code block, or a configuration block, I guess. This part is going to tell Nginx what to do. Whenever you get a request, this is you saying, hey, Nginx, every time you get a request on CSE312.com for a path that starts with /, which is all of them, do this stuff. That's what you're telling Nginx. So that's what that configuration is saying. And then listen on port 80. That's the port that you're going to listen on. You could do like 8080 if you wanted to, but once we're talking Nginx, we're usually talking deployment. We're going to be on ports 80 and 443 at that point. It'd be weird to have Nginx listening on a different port. So Nginx is going to listen and then do this. What I'm doing is a proxy. I'm using Nginx as a reverse proxy and saying, hey, whenever you get a request for cc312.com, can you please forward that to my app that's running on localhost? 127.0.0.1 is an alias for localhost. And forward it to localhost port 8312. Nginx is going to comply and send it to 8312. That is going to go to Docker Compose, which is listening to that port and mapping that to port 5000 inside my container. And then my container, my app running inside that container is going to take it from there, process the HTTP request, send a response, send that back to Docker Compose, which is going to send it back to Nginx, which is going to send it back to the user. HTTP version, for what it's worth, 1.1. And the question in chat was, can you talk about Nginx and forwarding headers? So these two headers we already had in our configuration. This was probably in your homework configurations. It wasn't required for your homework, but I did it in lecture, so I'm sure y'all had it there. But these are the headers for, I'll highlight this one specifically. These are the headers for a WebSocket request. If I get a WebSocket request, Nginx isn't by default going to forward those headers as a part of the reverse proxy process. It's not going to send those headers, the upgrade and connection headers, which are going to be upgrade, WebSocket, and connection upgrade. Those two headers that were always there on the WebSocket handshake. Those two headers won't be forwarded unless you tell Nginx to forward them. So we're going to forward those two headers. We're going to set a header named upgrade to a value which is a variable in Nginx called HTTP upgrade. We're going to do $HTTP upgrade to get the value of that variable in Nginx. Then connection, we're just going to set the upgrade regardless. And HTTP upgrade, if it's a upgrade request for WebSockets, that value will be WebSocket, and it's going to forward that socket, that header, to my container. For IP addresses, you do have to do like the minimal amount of Googling for this one. I'm not going to give the answer right away, but there is a variable for the IP address because Nginx will not by default forward the IP address. You have to do the same thing here, but for IP addresses. Set a header, grab the value of the variable for an IP address that Nginx has, set that value to one of your headers, a header that you choose, and send that header up to your app, and then your app is going to read that header that you set and get the actual IP address for the end user. If you don't do that, the IP address for the connection in your app, like right now we say this client sent us some information, we grab the IP address in the port. That IP address is going to be 127.0.0.1. It's going to be localhost because it's coming from Nginx as your reverse proxy. Your HTTP requests really literally are coming from Nginx. So Nginx is your client, which is not what we want to do when it comes to the DOS blocking. When we want to rate limit by IP address, that's not what we want to do. We don't want to rate limit everybody treated as the same person. That's not what we want. So we want to forward the IP address, the real IP address of the user, and then read that header and use the value of that header as the IP address for our rate limiting purposes. So it takes minimal, but a little bit more Nginx configuration to get that IP address. And once you get the IP address, you can implement all your timing code. Keep track of how many requests you're getting per IP address. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, you kind of answered it, but the $sign literally just represents like this is a value in Nginx.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're reading the value of a variable. Same thing we're doing down here. So I haven't talked about this, but if the value of the host variable equals cc312.com, then we're going to redirect to whatever the host and URI was. So whatever you were requesting, we're going to redirect you to that same exact host and path that you were requesting, but with a little s here. Because here we're listening on port 80. So if we ever get in this server block, that means somebody sent us a request on port 80. And if they sent us a request on port 80 for cc312.com, redirect them to HTTPS, read those variables to redirect them to the same thing they were requesting. Then nobody can access your site. This is pretty standard these days. Try accessing any site with HTTP. the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get redirected to HTTPS. If you find a site that doesn't, let me know, because I ran out of lecture examples of sites that don't use HTTPS. I used to have a whole bunch of them, but they all redirect now. If you personally made the domain for your team, can anyone SSH into the IP address and run it themselves? Okay, I gotta deconstruct this. If you personally made the domain for your team, I'm assuming you mean the DigitalOcean droplet. Can anyone SSH into the IP address and run it themselves? So if you, I have to be careful here because I don't know what the best recommendation is, but you do have the option to share the root password with your teammates for the DigitalOcean droplet. There is some level of trust you have to have because if it's your DigitalOcean account and they start doing some really strange things, they might start using up the CPU and things like that. So I'm a little hesitant to outright recommend it, but something you can do is share that root password. But not literally everyone can SSH in because they need your password. They need that password to be able to SSH in. But if you give that password to your teammates, then they'll be able to also SSH in to that container from anywhere. SSH will work from any device. Like if you gave me that password right now and your IP address, I could right now in lecture SSH into your container, into your droplet. And then do anything. Like if you created the DigitalOcean, maybe that's your question. If you're the one who signed up for the developer pack and got the DigitalOcean droplet, it's not required that you do all of the deployment stuff. I would much prefer that everybody on every team, everybody in the class, got hands-on experience with deployment. Someday I want to get that in this course. I'll figure out a good way to do that logistically. I think it'd be too many students who said, well, I already used my developer pack. I already used all that on other stuff. And with a team, it's unlikely that an entire team has used that on other stuff. But if it's individual, I don't know. But I'm getting off track here. Is my computer on? Oh, there actually are... There actually are a few sites, I forgot about that. There are a few sites that intentionally, yes, that's cute. There are a few sites that intentionally use HTTP only. This just jogged my memory on that. Why do they need any, why does this need JavaScript? Is it a worm? Am I hacked now?
Yes.
There's no external, there's no third-party requests here. I mean, yeah, it is. All right, I'm going to add that example to my list of one. There are a few. I forget what the use case was, but it was something about connecting to a hotel Wi-Fi, and I needed a site that wasn't HTTPS. I forget what it was. And there are sites designed to be HTTP. Just to confirm if I understand this correctly. Okay. If you read the IP address from the client using a library, socket or URL lib, it will read the same Nginx IP every time for every client? Yes. To be able to read the correct IP, we need to configure a header in Nginx. That is correct. Because you'll always get localhost when you're using Nginx as a reverse proxy because the requests are coming from Nginx, and Nginx will not just automatically replace that IP address. You have to tell it to. Did I miss any steps? I feel like that went by too quick. Maybe because I didn't do the full demo. You would install Nginx, go through, install Nginx, install Docker, install certbot, clone your repo, run your repo in Docker, configure your Nginx, configure your DNS, run certbot, and then celebrate, I guess. The last step. Any questions on this? Everybody solid with deployment? How many of you have deployed already? I should have asked this at the top. Oh, not a lot. Y'all know that's due Monday, right? Like there's a lot of points riding on that. So hopefully y'all get there. I don't know if any TAs have office hours until then. So this is it. This is your last chance for questions. Yeah.
Why is the TTL number so high on the drop that you were just going to create?
I don't know. I was wondering that when I saw it, but I don't know why it's so much higher for a C name. And
What is the TTL number for?
oh, I don't remember.
How many seconds?
It's time to live, but that seems high. I don't know. Nobody has any questions? We don't have a lecture question, so we got 2 extra minutes. But if y'all don't want it, see you later.